Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Script Apart, a podcast about the first draft secrets of great movies and TV shows. My name's Al Horner, and for practically as long as I've loved cinema, I've loved the work of my guest today. Eric Roth is the Academy Award-winning writer behind films like Forrest Gump. He wrote The Insider for Michael Mann, Munich for Steven Spielberg, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button for David Fincher, 2018's A Star is Born for Bradley Cooper, and 2 years ago I had the delight of his company on this very show as we broke down his script for Denis Villeneuve's Dune. Do go back and check out that episode if you haven't heard it. Today I'm joined by Eric once again to discuss what might just be his crowning accomplishment. Few films this year have left the extraordinary imprint of Killers of the Flower Moon, a tale of love, murder, and quite literally poisonous greed in 1920s America, directed by Martin Scorsese. Eric's script for the film, which he co-wrote with the beloved auteur, was adapted from a non-fiction book by the author David Grann, but with a fairly different approach to the story told in that tome. The book investigated a series of killings of members of the indigenous Osage Nation by white men who coveted their oil-rich land. At the heart of all this was a woman named Mollie Kyle, played in the film by Lily Gladstone, who marries a First World War veteran named Ernest Burkhart, portrayed by Leo DiCaprio. Mollie was forced to watch in horror as at least 24 of her family members and friends were systematically killed as a result of the scheming of Ernest's corrupt uncle, a man named William King Hale, played by Robert De Niro. Mollie was not only unaware that Hale was masterminding these deaths, she was also unaware that the man she loved was helping him. That's the true life tale upon which Grann wrote his book, Killers of the Flower Moon, or to give it its full title, Killers of the Flower Moon, The Osage Murders and the Birth of the FBI. It had that subtitle for good reason. The book delved into the law enforcement response to the killings as much as the Osage Nation victims themselves. As you'll discover in this episode, Eric's first draft of the movie adaptation initially followed suit before he and Scorsese realised they had a responsibility to navigate this tale from a different perspective. It wasn't as simple as making Mollie the lead. That story, as non-indigenous filmmakers, Scorsese has implied, wasn't theirs to tell. Instead, the pair set about making a film about complicity and culpability that would centre Ernest as the protagonist in all his ugly cowardice. In the spoiler conversation that you're about to hear, we break down the rationale behind that choice, we talk about the film's key scenes, uncovering some fascinating details along the way about Eric's first draft. I of course ask about the meaning of the movie's astounding finale, a moment unlike anything in Scorsese's filmography, and the degree to which Eric believed that Ernest really did love Mollie, despite it all. Can a man who's poisoning his wife truly care and adore that person? Killers of the Flower Moon suggests that it's more complex than you might think. Eric, as ever, was a total pleasure to chat with. He's a storyteller so inspiringly in love with what he does that at 78 years old, there's absolutely no sign of him slowing down. Writing screenplays is simply what he does. A huge thanks to Eric, and as ever, a big thank you to our Patreon community for helping make this episode possible. If you like what we do on Script Apart and want to help the show continue to grow, patreon.com/scriptapart is where you can get ad-free episodes, early access to episodes, the chance to put your questions to upcoming guests, and all sorts of other perks. That address again, in case you're interested, it's patreon.com/scriptapart. Okay, with that all out of the way, let's hand things off to our fantastic guest. This is the wonderful Eric Roth discussing the first draft secrets of Killers of the Flower Moon. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. You're listening to Script Apart, hosted by me, Al Horner, produced by Camille Demek. Eric, such a privilege to have you back on the show. The last time we spoke, in summer 2021, you were talking about how special you were expecting Killers of the Flower Moon to be, and boy, you weren't kidding. You mentioned in that conversation what a winding road it had been towards production for that project.
Yeah.
Having lived with this story, since 2017, Eric, and having worked so tirelessly with Martin Scorsese to make sure you were telling this tale the right way, how have the last few weeks been for you, seeing this film finally reach audiences, seeing it win the admiration it has, and witnessing some of the conversations that it sparked?
Oh, I think it's been great. I guess it's everything I hoped it would be, and particularly because I think it represented so well, and he created it so well, Marty's vision. I mean, I'm a big believer in, as a writer, not only providing sort of the boats that they can sail off on, but being a companion in that way, and whatever changes are needed, I'm there for them, and whatever they feel they need. I mean, it's a director's medium, so at the end of the day, as much as and as important as writing is, and it starts with the word and everything. It's eventually going to be the director's movie, and Marty, of course, is a master. So this was a great. I love it for the subject matter. That it's an important movie that for the first time, I think really tells the kind of culpability we have in the destruction of these indigenous people, and also is on a big scale. All the wonderful things that it is, and I think it's a movie that'll last, and I think that I feel proud to have been part of this. That I loan whatever my gifts are.
You mentioned the subject matter there, Eric. When you were last with us on Script Apart, we talked about Dune, another film in which, you're dealing with imperialism, you're dealing with a story about a white-skinned culture moving in on the land of an indigenous population, taking what isn't theirs. Killers of the Flower Moon, of course, has significantly fewer sandworms, but I think the same description kind of applies. I don't know whether that's a coincidence, whether it's just how your schedule is shaken out, or whether colonialism is a topic that you've been purposefully wanting to explore. But can you talk me through what it's been like to have your head in that subject matter for back-to-back films now? Like, have you learned anything about this type of brutal, violent imperialism and why it occurs from the last few years working on these two projects?
Well, I knew quite a bit about more British imperialism. I'm sort of a big student of English history. I love it, and it's like, so I was quite aware, obviously, of the colonialism of England. I mean, the things that are interesting in American education is that nobody talks about that. People talk in global ideas about what we did to the Native Americans, obviously, and when you get into science specifics, people are really ignorant about what happened. Dovetailing with that was, while I was doing research for this, I realized the Tulsa massacre had occurred the same year this began, 1921, I believe. And I knew nothing about the Tulsa massacre. It just showed my ignorance and also my schooling. And I think I had pretty good education. Also, I read like crazy, and I don't remember much about it. If anything, it was just sort of maybe some, something. And so it went to show, that's why we included in the movie. I felt, Marty and I both felt this be something, since it's the same era, that we needed to include it. And part of that is to show what we don't know. I mean, Tom Hanks is a wonderful kind of advocate to say our education just isn't enough about our own history, and some of the terrible things, obviously, in our history.
So you first started writing this film, I believe, in 2017.
Is that right? Is that true? I don't know anymore. It's it seems like a long. I thought maybe it was 2016 and I finished in 20, but maybe you're probably right. Yeah. So you're saying it's been 6+ years. So probably right. You're right.
Yeah. Well, 2017 really was such a tumultuous year for America as the reverberations of the 2016 election began to be felt. That was kind of all going on around you as you began to write this tale. I know you obviously had the source material to adapt, but I am curious about the extent to which, when you sit down to write a screenplay in a way about white supremacists manipulating their way into power, whether it's possible to ignore the parallels with modern day. Did any of what was going on politically at the time bleed onto the page in any way, do you think, Eric?
I don't. I mean, I could lie and say yes, but I don't think. I don't think. I mean, I don't know what your subconscious is doing. There are other things I think I've written that were more to the point. This was just to trace. Well, I guess you could say, if you want to do a more kind of schematic of things, that some of the attitudes people were taking during Black Lives Matter and that kind of stuff that were not dissimilar to the way we treated the indigenous people. But I love history. I love it to be accurate. So I think I just honed in on whatever crept in from my own political feel. There's nothing, or Marty's, nothing that would. I guess the only thing I'd say is, as an overall gestalt, Marty in particular, and it was a great thematic of all of our culpability in this, and that's why you have kind of we try as best we can and to do without headlines. In other words, we didn't want big speeches, but people looking out the window and just seeing a normal, group of people walking down the street and giving the feeling that we're all culpable. And then the wonderful scene with the fire, I think that represents, sort of the almost religious quality of it, that this is what we've done, But I can't say anything specific comes to mind about the politics of Trump's election and everything else.
The film has been described, though, as the story of America's original sin, kind of addressing the bloody foundations on which the country was built. Is there anything that you think a story like this illuminates about where we're at today? Are there any correlations you think we can draw between this tale and where the culture has ended up?
I think obviously the culture trying to catch up with what we've done, where we were, as I say, culpable. What can we do to right a lot of wrongs? I think sometimes it goes a little too far in the whole woke conversation, but none of that was what became relevant in this particular instance. Was to get the history right, no question about it, but to also we were kind of and it happened, I'm not so sure originally by design, but it became evident that we could not probably tell the story the book told. That the point of view of the book, which was, if you don't mind me getting into that.
No, okay, please do. The
story of the book was about Tom White, basically, and Mollie, she was the center of it, the Native American woman, but a real kind of hero who was a Texas Ranger and then became in the first class of the FBI. And he came in to try to get justice in some way for what was going on, the murders that were going on there. And Leonardo was going to originally play him. So the first scripts were Leonardo as this young FBI, Texas Ranger FBI agent. And very much a Western from the get-go to the, we really Marty and I really leaned into John Ford to make what Marty would conceive of as a John Ford Western for himself. He had never made a Western. And as things progressed, we did a long reading of the script, like 3 or 4 hours actually, and it started to gnaw at all of us, but in particularly, I think Leonardo, that he felt that, number one, he didn't feel he could play the hero. He wondered whether he could be Gary Cooper in that sense, and obviously, I think he can play anything. And we also, and credit to Leonardo and Marty as much as obviously, felt that we were getting into an area that we were going to have like a great white savior, come in saved the day for the Native Americans, like the cavalry riding in a weird way, and none of us wanted that. So that meant we had to reconsider how we were approaching the whole movie. And then I started from not scratch, but I started again and made Leonardo decide he wanted to play the husband character, which he plays, and very, very complicated character. We couldn't find in our knowledge of literature, movies, art, where somebody is in love with somebody, and we believe that he was in love with his wife, and trying to kill them, And so that's a very fine line you have to walk. And I think Leonardo did it spectacularly, where he was tender and you could feel the love. And then on the other hand, he was diabolic in what he's trying to do to her, and her family. So in any case, we began again, and many drafts later, we came to at least the structure of things and the way we felt it would work best. And then a pandemic hit, and Marty kept working on it. I did my work, and it eventually became, I think, even more interior. He decided let's look at this from an interior, inside. It's outside rather than outside to inside. And so you had this sort of interior scene relationship expand of a kind with Bob De Niro's character, Hale, and Leonardo's character, the nephew. And so that's what the movie ultimately became, and it's certainly different, but the same. It's different with the same sentiment, before it was, I don't know, I think this ended up being the right direction for this, that I think says the right things in the right way. And so it was a long process, but it's not unusual. I mean, I've seen some articles about, rewritten, blah, blah, blah. I could say that on so many of the movies I've been on, where either I've still been around or other people have come in because, the ideas are just not. And it's about the director getting what he wants. And on this particular script, I mean, I don't know if it was the first day, but early day, I walked in to see Marty, to work with him in New York, and said, let's do this together. Let's share credit, and let's equally do as much writing as we can do. And he said, that's wonderful. Let's do that. And we ended up doing it. I mean, he's not exactly a hands to the typewriter guy, but he certainly can articulate how he wants things to be seen and heard and viewed, and articulated. And I think he did. He made the movie he wanted to make, and that's my. In a lot of ways, that's my role, is to provide him with the best ideas, the best imagination, and then for him to make a movie that hopefully we both see the same way. And sometimes it hasn't worked that way. I mean, I've written things for directors we haven't seen eye to eye on, but you still try to find. I've been very lucky. I've made like 30 movies, and I've had a close relationship with almost all the directors, but in the end of the day, it's going to be the director's movie, what he sees it, how he sees it. So that this was, I mean, people have talked about, the rewriting, but it was not, it wasn't unusual. The same thing on Munich, did the same thing on The Insider. I mean, some a little more complicated, where some, a director might have been unhappy where I was going. They decided to bring someone else in, which is very wounding, but that's life, So, but this worked out to where I think we did justice to the story, justice to the people, and that I think he made a great movie.
So it sounds like your initial draft clung a tiny bit closer to the book, Eric. The book, of course, has that very telling subtitle, "The Birth of the FBI." It is in part from the view of the investigators. From what I've heard, your first draft was, in keeping with the book, kind of a police procedural, like there was that emphasis on the perspective of the investigators. Have I got that right? Is that correct?
No, that's not true. I'll say why. It is true. We agreed early on, even with the book as it was, that we were going to tell the audience who was doing it and how they were doing it to a certain extent. So that the audience, we felt this was a novel way of, the audience was a step ahead always of the investigator, Tom White character that Jesse Plemons ends up playing. So that it wasn't a mystery that way, mystery to him, but that, in other words, he was, so I thought it would have been a fascinating way to have, if we had done it that way. But as I said, we also had embraced this whole Western idea about some of the things that were in the book about him picking his brother. His brother had been killed in a shootout when he was a Texas Ranger, and he picked his brother up at a train station in a coffin, put him in a boxcar, and he sat with him in the boxcar. But I mean, that kind of look of things, and that didn't that changed the specifics, but Marty kept the same look of the piece, so it felt like a Western of a kind, you know. Yeah, that was yeah, and there was a whole section with the FBI, and you meet J. Edgar Hoover, and he puts together his team. Yeah, so in that sense, it was procedural. Yes, you're right. But it was a little more. I don't want to say flat-footed, because I thought that worked as it was, but I think this version is far more important for telling the story of what needs to be told, which is about the Osage and this Mollie character that was at the center of it, and that in the long run, I think this will stand the test of time because of the approach that Marty took.
And it became a love story in that process, like a very complicated and ambiguous one, but that is the beating heart of this movie, this couple, Mollie and Ernest, and this question that the movie kind of leaves unanswered of what exactly was the love that existed between them.
Well, I think they both loved each other. From everything I've read and everything we conceived of, is that this was a love story of a strange kind. And only three movies we could or piece of art we could think of was Othello, Desdemona, probably Talented Mr. Ripley, maybe Place in the Sun, and there was one more, but those all had somebody who was in love and was trying to kill him. The other side of the equation, I really can't answer, because I don't, to this moment, and maybe I'm ignorant, and I've asked so many people, and somebody who's smarter than me will tell you, I don't know why the indigenous women were wanting to marry white men. Maybe because they had, in most cases, they had way more money and things. I mean, so I don't, unless you fall in love. But beyond that, maybe it was because they were downtrodden, there was some feeling of success to that. I don't know. I can only give you lay psychological reasons. I just didn't know. So I've been asked that question. Well, why is she with him, and why doesn't she wonder what's going on? And I think two things are true. That one, she was in love with him and did not want to see what was going on. She was blinded by love, and the cliche. And the other was, as I say, the psychological idea of why these women wanted to be with these men. And it makes the movie more interesting. That would have been there whether Tom White was the hero or not. You know what I'm saying? That was a complication, but it certainly becomes more of in that sense, a kitchen drama between these two people.
That is one of the many kind of great complexities of the movie. Like you set Mollie up as a character who is very smart and very independent and has agency, and she immediately clocks Ernest as this Quixote, as she calls him. So there is an interesting dimension to the film in which you are wondering what it is about Ernest that has made her kind of go along with his seduction, I suppose.
Well, I think she found him and this is all based on real stuff. So I didn't make this up, or did Marty. The woman did seem to love Ernest. They had 3 children together. They lived a fairly good life together, I think. They seemed to have passion, from what I understand. I wasn't there, but she's very much, Lily Gladstone is just perfect the way she portrays this particular woman, who seemed to be rather stoic in her approach to things. That thing we talk about with the birds, she doesn't like a lot of talking. and she seemed devoted to him, from what I gather, so whether she's blinded by that, and I think she thought he was handsome and whatever else she was attracted to about him. So that complicates things. It makes it even more interesting. Yeah.
So Mollie's very much like the moral epicenter of the movie, but it's not her movie in the kind of traditional screenwriting sense. Ernest is probably the protagonist by virtue of how much time we spend with him on screen, I suppose.
I would say so. I mean, there are certain criteria. I mean, you have Leonardo DiCaprio, so I mean, a major star, so that's important. The character's important. His relationship with Bob De Niro is important. Mollie is not. She's not symbolic, but she does represent the the Osage in that way, even though we obviously, and Marty particularly, leaned way into the Osage culture, gave them as much due as he possibly could so they could articulate the things that they felt had been wrong, they had been wrong where they had. But Mollie was always the epicenter of the book, too. In other words, it starts with her walking in the book, I believe, just amongst the wildflowers, and you get a sense of a spirit with her blanket on her, and so she represented the indigenous people, in that sense for this particular movie. One could say, some people would say, well, why didn't you do it from her point of view? I guess you could have, but that wasn't, each filmmaker and artist chooses a point of view that, Francis Coppola could have decided to do Godfather from Diane Keaton's point of view if he wanted to, but this is the point of view we felt was the most interesting, that had the most dramatic tension to it, and also showed as we said, the culpability and malfeasance and the way they treated natives as second-class people and everything else.
I suppose it would have been quite difficult as well, like with the historical fact of the story, meaning Mollie is unavoidably sidelined for a big chunk of the second act, in bed having been poisoned by Ernest, and that would have obviously been a bit prohibitive from a storytelling standpoint as well, I suppose.
Yeah, she in real life she was proactive in certain areas, and other areas this was part of her personality. That, aside from the fact she was obviously being poisoned, so she was bedridden and had was trying to stay alive. But she was proactive. She got some detectives to try to help solve the thing. And I think she talked to the tribal elders and everything, and tried to do everything they could to stop all these murders, which is not only, we limit it basically to, not particular, I don't want to limit it, but we focus on her family, which was what their scheme was. They were going to kill all of them and then hope to get all the, the money. But there were so many others. I mean, there's numbers up to like 300 that were killed, or 200 and something. So it wasn't. I mean, it was like a gold rush coming to kill people when they discovered oil. Every rotten bastard in America showed up in that town, which went from, I want to say, 2,500 people, which was the size of the Osage, maybe a little bigger, and to all of a sudden 15, 20,000 people, and a whole percentage of Anglos, Caucasians came rolling in, with kind of money on their minds.
And let me wind back to something you said a few moments ago that I don't want to just breeze past, because it was really interesting. You spoke about kind of this almost being like a whodunit, except from very early on in the movie, we have this character, Robert De Niro's character, William Hale, who explicitly announces his plan for his nephew, who buys in. We know as an audience exactly who's doing this.
Just to interrupt you, Marty said early on, or I think it was Marty, but he said, this isn't a whodunit, it's a who didn't do it. And that was after the first version, when it was emphasizing the Tom White character. So he always felt that way. So, this was, again, that notion of culpability, because we're all kind of culpable. I mean, at the end of one of the early versions, before Leonardo changed parts, and they still have the line in another context slightly, but at the end of the day, somebody says to the Tom White character, well, at least you got justice, right? And he said, what justice? He said, they're more liable to convict somebody for kicking their dog than for killing a native. So, yeah, there is no justice that way. No justice.
Well, it's so interesting. Like the question that rings through the movie, can you find the wolves in this picture?
Yeah.
As a result of that scene early on with William Hale, we absolutely can as an audience. They're in plain view to us, but they conceal themselves. Hale conceals himself in a really cunning way from the community. And I guess one impact of getting rid of the question of who's perpetrating these murders is, as an audience, you then have 3.5 hours to ponder a different question, which is, why? What is it about greed and whatever else that motivates Hale that's so poisonous?
And it's about, it is about this kind of incipient avarice, and in this case, not even incipient, but and I think it's a metaphor for what taking the land from people, that kind of thing. So it's I mean that's what I say once again. I keep emphasizing this word culpability, and these two, and it's all true. So it's not like we've created characters just to make some point that this is what he did. What people are slightly forgetting is some of the ethos in 1920s are different than they are today. So that for instance, Hale felt he was best friends with all sorts of Osage people, and he probably was, On the same token, he was killing, their families and things. And the Ernest character, Hale, when he was in prison, I have all these letters where he was writing letters to all these, in quote, friends of his that were Osage, saying how much he missed them, and they wrote back saying they missed him, and because he was called the king of the Osage Hills in that way because of that. But I'm saying it's a different world. I mean, a different world. The wealthy of the wealthiest had great power. I'm not saying they don't now, but a rancher in that area had all that money, and he was a devious man who used his power for evil, obviously. But also, as I say, I think the look at life was quite different. They were very religious. They were, I'm not saying trusting, but they accepted people were not particularly all good. You know what I'm saying? So, and then to say that Ernest, one of the reasons I'm convinced he loved her was when he was dying of cancer, he asked for his son to spread his ashes in the Osage Hills. And I think he somehow adopted this world, and that she meant that much to him.
Yeah, that kind of echoes what Margie Burkhart, Mollie's great-granddaughter, has always said about the real-life story, which she insists is not a case of victim versus villain. It was more complex than that. She truly believes that, Mollie and Ernest were in love. Eric, we should probably touch on the length of the movie, as that's been such a big discussion point. You mentioned earlier how the table read for your first draft took 4 hours to get through. It seems that one constant throughout the evolution of this movie was a recognition between you and Scorsese that you needed a pretty long runtime to tell this story. And it's clear from a narrative perspective why you needed that kind of length. There is so much plot to get through. It's a dense story spanning many years. But it struck me watching the film that there's kind of almost an emotional effect to that runtime too, that lets you experience Mollie's grief in this unflinching way. The movie's refusal to kind of rush through the slow torture that she must have experienced, seeing members of her family, members of her community killed one by one. I think you come to understand how it must have felt for Mollie in a way that I don't think you would have had if you'd combined a bunch of the murders into a montage to trim the runtime, for example.
Yeah, no, well, Marty does those things in a particular way. They become vignettes, where the violence is almost startling, but it was always there. Runtime, I write long scripts, so I don't help that way. And I always say that the movie's as long or as short as the director wants to make it.
Yeah.
And it's not really up to me. We could debate whether there's too much of one thing, and we can probably pick it apart. But this is just the length of the movie he wanted to make. He felt told the story, and I would never say nay to that. I don't mind really long movies because I look at them as watching a sort of a wonderful novel or something where I just get completely embedded in it. But I can understand people feeling sometimes it's a little longer than they either can get out for and all those things. But this one's pretty unique. I mean, it's really interesting to me that this is a complete, local survey, but all the people I've talked to have seen it all over the country, that everybody has one same reaction, aside from seeming to like it, but or appreciate it and grown with it. That the audiences sit for those 3.5 hours without moving. And obviously, someone gets up to take a pee or something, but beyond that, they're transfixed and sort of mesmerized by the whole thing. I love that reaction, so that they seem to be completely imbued in it.
Yeah. It really does feel like the length of the film has been like leveraged into a tool of the storytelling. As I say, you really feel Mollie's plight in a way that I don't think you would have if you were only spending 2 hours with her.
I was just while you were talking, I was trying to think the lengths of some of my other movies. The Good Shepherd was quite long. That might have been 240 or something. I don't know. Forrest Gump was probably closer to 220 or something. But I don't know if I've had any that had this. Nothing I've done is over 3 hours. I've written scripts that they could have made 3 hours plus. And there was a debate about whether we should have an intermission and this and that. But Marty, he just felt this. You need to sit down and just watch this.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. We touched on the violence of this film there. It feels like this violence is different to the violence of previous Scorsese movies. I'm wondering whether there was a directive from Marty about how to approach the killings themselves on the page, because the film feels quite pointed in its depiction of violence. It refuses to make it part of the entertainment of the story. So much of it is off screen. The bomb going off we experience in Ernest and Mollie's bedroom, rather than it being kind of gratuitously shown. Yeah, and oftentimes the film will simply present us with a body rather than showing us the killing, and this all feels really deliberate. So
I think this. I got to be honest. I left that up to Marty. In the sense, I would say, I think maybe I had some details that Marty ended up not doing. About shooting somebody, or he added something like that, or showed it in a different way. You're right, oddly. I mean, interestingly about the bombing. I had a longer kind of setup for the bombing with more kind of tension to it that way, where the guy sets a bomb in the basement and this and that. And it always, as I remember, in all the drafts, was shown first with Mollie and him and Ernest in bed and being sort of blown out of bed, and then going to the explosion. But I mean, Marty made a decision to make the violence certainly part of the piece, but that not to do it where it was so much of the rhythm of the piece in the way he's done before. I think I'd have to think about that. But he's always done these kind of wonderful vignettes, and obviously different kind of music to those, from Rolling Stones and stuff, to where it becomes almost humorous,
Yeah.
And this was not. This was just sort of matter of fact, and I guess it was closer to the Irishman that way.
Yeah.
If you think of the Irishman, you just have Bob would just walk up to someone and shoot him in the back of the head and walk off. He didn't make a dance out of it.
And was that informed by sensitivity to the material, sensitivity to the community whose story you were telling here?
I don't know. I can't say. You'd have to ask Marty that. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I think I knew he would conceive and do it, shoot it the way he wanted it to be articulated. So we never had any big conversation about it. I gave him ways to do it. Some together, some separately, how we imagine the violence to be. And I never thought, I mean, in many cases, that's just true. I don't think about, if I have some strong feeling, let's make believe I'm making this up. I want someone shot off a roof and it means something to me. Then I will say it's really important to me. So if we could do it this way, and he would have considered it. Whether he ended up doing it, I don't know. But in this case, I don't think I knew some of them were also sort of true crime things. This wasn't made up. A lot of these. This Anna Brown woman who died in the creek because she was shot in a car from the back of the head or whatever, that she had been taken away kind of, and she was drunk, and it within itself was kind of complicated, and they did things where like he gives the guy the car so he'll kill the guy in payment for the car. Those were all real things. I mean, this was all stuff that we didn't make up. So and a guy, like, you saw a car that I think runs into a tree, and that was because they did something to the brakes on it or something. So I'm saying it was all historically accurate. I can't think of too many that were made up, in that way.
The segment of the movie involving Mollie's slow poisoning, like that's in a way the worst betrayal, the most violent act, despite it being a quieter type of violence being enacted. Like this just broke my heart, this entire segment. And
Yeah.
It builds. Well, actually, there are a couple of things to say. Number one, I know that. Am I right in thinking that your partner is somewhat of a diabetes specialist, Eric?
Yeah, she's a world famous diabetes. She's really world. She has like 2,000 patients.
That must have been helpful. If you had any questions, just ask.
Oh yeah, for that, but it's interesting. It's a great historical fact, which I remember running into her when I read it, that Mollie was one of only 5 people in the whole world that had insulin.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It had just been discovered that year in 1921, and they tested it, and it was, I think, from a cow's pancreas, if I'm right. 2 men in Banton and Baxter, I think their names were something. They were Canadians, and the only people that could only go to people who really could afford it. It was really incredibly expensive. And she was one of the 5, which is bizarre, in its own way. And then, I'm not sure if he knew at first he was poisoning her, but I think he did know finally, and the people that are less, we just don't know that much about what they did and what they didn't do and who they were either working for or not, was the 2 doctors. They were they're very questionable. The Sohn, whatever their names was, brothers. So that was kind of a muddy area, and I'm not sure we sorted it out as well as maybe we could have in the movie. But I think we wanted this feeling of that he wasn't sure at first, and then he realized he was, and he kept doing it.
Well, all of that leads to the most nightmarish and most like lyrical scene in the film, I think, in which, like, amidst this kind of great raging fire outside, Ernest administers the poison and then sort of takes it as well, almost like in this kind of like guilt-ridden solidarity.
Yeah, there's like a suicidal element to it.
Yeah. Can you talk me through what you think's happening in that scene? Because there was just a variety of different takes on it when I was coming out the cinema, just hearing people talk about that moment.
Well, I know we had talked about that we wanted, because at one point Ernest did sort of try to kill himself with the poison, So that was probably the way Marty articulated that. It was always very tricky, because as I said, we couldn't know whether, because I don't know, I never spoke to Ernest Burkhart, whether he knew he was poisoning her or not. But I think he did at some point. You could also make a case where he was actually trying to see if this was poison that was in the vial, Yeah, so I think it was a historical thing that we weren't 100% sure about, so was left up in the air slightly, even though you kind of know the result. And he tells her basically at the end, which is a wonderful thing, when she's so re-poisoning me, basically, and and since he doesn't answer, she knows the answer to it.
The last time we spoke on this show, Eric, we talked about the loneliness that runs in your movies, and I think the same applies to Killers of the Flower Moon. There's a literal loneliness to Mollie as she's confined to her room by illness and robbed of the family she holds dear. And And there's a spiritual loneliness to Ernest, especially. Like that scene where news reaches him in his prison cell that his child has died. There's this kind of absolute guttural hollowness that in him that makes clear he has nothing and he has no one. And what's lonelier than that, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, I think this was just a piece of material that probably spoke to me because of, amongst other things, obviously, the quality of the loneliness. And I think I feel that way about kind of the Old West and things like that. There's to me, but that's me, as you say from last time, that was something that once critic and now radio host Elvis Mitchell said about all my movies. But I think maybe that's why I was drawn to the material also, so it wasn't me creating the material, but it still continues. I just wrote a movie for Denis Villeneuve, which I won't tell you what it is. It's kind of a secret of its own, but we'll see what ends up happening with it. But it's about space and time, and it's very lonely. So it's certainly about eternity.
I'm so glad to hear you guys are collaborating again.
Yeah, we'll see if it works. Yeah, no, I adore him. He's wonderful.
Yeah. You mentioned a moment ago in passing that kind of final encounter between Mollie and Ernest, in which she asks the question, "Were you poisoning me?" How did you approach that scene? Like all the things that are said in that sequence are so fascinating. All the things that are left unsaid, equally fascinating.
I think it just was the ultimate. I mean, and she's slow to the realization, obviously. And you say, well, why is she so slow? And we talked about that, but it's the ultimate betrayal. This is somebody she felt here. He's going to testify, he's going to tell the truth and everything else, and yet he was trying to kill me, and so it's I think it's a wonderful scene. I thought he staged it just right, and I thought he gave you just enough of the information without getting into a whole conversation or a big dialogue about why would you do this to me and that kind of thing.
And how did that compare to the initial draft, in which I'm presuming Tom White is the protagonist of that original version of Killers of the Flower Moon? Perhaps he must have had a hero moment, so to speak.
I don't remember. I think the scene was not unlike what we have in the movie as it is. I have to really look. It was choreographed quite differently. That I think historically, and then I know one part was not historical, but he found out about the death of his daughter, who died, I think, of whooping cough, and it was just decimated, and which made him now want to sort of find some sense of reclamation for himself and testify and all. And he went to the funeral. I remember that, and it was very touching. And then there's a thing I invented, which was not in the book, and it's kind of melodramatic, but it was a hero moment where Tom White character got Ernest in a car to drive him, we thought, auspiciously back to jail. But instead, he takes off across the plain, and he goes for quite a while. And he just stops, and he gets out. He says, "You can go to Mexico now. Go wherever you want." And he starts walking back, and you don't know what he's going to do, Ernest. And then he appears the next day in court to testify. But I'm saying this was a real movie kind of moment. I'm not sure it worked with what we ended up being probably a more mature version in that sense, a little more sophisticated. It was a very that and a couple other things with Tom White were very heroic, but it really spoke to this sort of great white guy, fixing everything.
His name is even Tom White.
Yeah. So that's that I remember, and there was a moment, I think, with Mollie and him, but I think it was in the courtroom for some reason, where I just don't remember anymore. I'd have to go look as to what was then that the same kind of scene where Mollie then basically just said, "Fuck yourself, go fuck yourself."
The final scene, Eric, is one of the most singular pieces of cinema that I've seen in a good long time. Like, we've spoken throughout this conversation about this idea of culpability, and that final sequence throws the culpability kind of inwards. It seems to be Scorsese kind of examining his own culpability through his body of work. Like,
I don't know body of work, but I think, yeah, I don't honestly remember if this was my idea or his to do that. I know we both did not want to do chyrons for saying, so and so lived for 25 more years, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we both were aware, and as I said, I don't remember. I'll give Marty credit, but 1947 there was a radio show. And so we both said, oh my God, what a great way to do the titles. Now, we've had some mixed opinions about it. Some people are I think it's kind of bravura, I think it's amazing. And then Marty doing it, I was very moved by that for some reason. I don't know why, it almost made me cry, because it was him coming to say, yeah, this is a story told by storytellers, but this is a real thing that happened to people that, that we killed so many lives. And that, yeah, I'm the one who's telling the story. And also about how, as storytellers, we can tell any story we want, and most people will believe it, so it's iconography of things also. I found it sort of staggering in its own way, but I was very moved by Marty doing it. Some people like the radio show, don't like Marty, and, it's that kind of combination, but that to me is good. So something that's brave, Yeah, I think it's a sort of astonishing piece of cinema. Sometimes you get some things that you're not expecting, and I love that. The more I can do of that, the better. And that was one of the main reasons we did it. I remember the end of Captain Phillips with Tom Hanks, which he probably gave his best performance, where it was just raw and real, and they had a real EMT person who asked him questions, how you feeling, and he broke down, and it had the same kind of resonance to me. When you find something that is just so different and so unexpected and almost goofy with the radio sounds, sound of the radio effects, and on a real case that had, real life consequences, and there it is. And that's how it ends up,
It's so complex and so layered, because we've been immersed as an audience in this tale, and in the kind of, we've been entwined in the lives of these characters for 3.5 hours by this point. And then suddenly we're yanked out of that, and we're witnessing this terrible tale being turned into entertainment. But then, of course, you become aware that as a viewer, well, how is this film any different?
That's right. That's exactly right. So but it also speaks to the subtlety of what we can do with film literature. We can tell you any point of view, and if we make it sound real enough, you're probably going to believe it, unless you do your own research and find out what the truth was. And so don't accept just on face value what you're shown. And so I think in all those respects, I mean, I'm not saying it's as never mind, I don't want to say this, but there's always a great debate about film credit, right? So on Citizen Kane, so the Writers Guild determines credits, right? So they say who did the work, who justifies the credits. And so someone once said, well, let's assume the whole movie of Citizen Kane was written, but there was no Rosebud in it. And then they were asked to bring in, and all that person did was do the sled and the rosebud in the beginning and the sled and the rosebud in the end. I mean, quite a contribution, you know what I'm saying? And I'm not making this radio show equivalent, but I think those are the kind of unexpected things that make movies pretty great,
The last time we spoke, Eric, you mentioned at the end of our conversation how you were trying to, I'm trying to think of the exact phrasing because it was really special. You mentioned how you were trying to maximize your time on the planet that you have left to tell the stories that really mattered to you. And that quote kind of came back to me watching this because it feels like such a vital story. And yeah, I just wanted to kind of like get
Yeah,
an
but I would
update.
like maybe not have had whatever many years we decide on, 7 years to have gone by. Well, part of that he did the movie, The Irishman, Pandemic. So a lot of it was just time passing, because of other things happening. Yeah, I'm exactly the same way, even more so at 78, because probably last time we talked, I was 74 or something. And so, yeah, but I still, I'm blessed, I guess. I'm still vital. I still have so many things I want to say. I love writing still, and hopefully we'll have a couple, at least more movies to have explored some other things, and hope they're good and work with great directors. And so the only thing is I've been able to do more than one thing at once, a little bit. They overlap. I wrote a play of High Noon that looks like it'll probably get done, which is very exciting to me. And then, Marty and I have something that we want to seemingly want to do together. I know we want to do it together. We have to make sure it all works pretty special. And I've got 2 or 3 other projects that are going that all look very real and very exciting to me. So, yeah, nothing's changed. Also, the scripts have gotten shorter. So, because I don't have time to write 180-page scripts anymore. No one will read them anyway. So I think my last script I turned out was like 104 pages, unheard of.
Wow, it's one of those projects you've got in the works. Is that the Kennedys project?
That's I did the pilot for a version we hope to have as like a version of The Crown, but with the Kennedy family and particularly John.
Wow.
Yeah, so I did one version, and now I'm just dealing with notes, as to how to, some things people agree, some disagree, same as anything. And it's just back to what have you done for me lately, And so that I think could find its way. I mean, I don't know if I'd write more than the pilot, maybe one more episode. I think it's a fabulous, could be a fabulous show,
Well, by the time you add that to Killers of the Flower Moon, which of course tells a tale of early America, to Forrest Gump, which flits through a very different chunk of American history in a very different way, there's going to be a pretty significant chronicle of American history traceable in your work, Eric.
Well, I love history, like I said to you, so that if, and particularly if it's, I don't know, Forrest Gump's not very sophisticated that way, but but this is a very, very, the book is won a Pulitzer Prize and everything. It's a wonderful history of the Kennedy family from 1915 to basically the 60s, I think, and of everybody. And it's very, very thoughtful and very erudite. So it's the kind of elegance that Peter Morgan is a genius at with The Crown. I'm not pretending I'm him, but I'm trying to emulate his, his, as I say, his elegance and his look at history, and also he's as good a writer as I know. He writes with metaphor, and that's really hard to do. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I can't wait for all these projects, Eric.
Yeah. Well, I have a movie. I'm wearing a hat. This is from a movie that Bob Zemeckis and I wrote called Here, Here.
Yeah.
It comes out next year. It's finished, basically, with Tom Hanks and Robin Wright, and Paul Bettany. And anyway, it's very, very special. It's from a graphic novel. Camera's locked off. There's no coverage. One room over 100 years. And anything that lived in this property, like dinosaurs and marsh birds and then Native Americans and Benjamin Franklin's son supposedly lived across the street. And, it's quite extraordinary, I think, and it's like nothing you've ever seen. And we'll see. So far, we've had 2 previews, and everybody seems to love it. But we'll see. A little early, but yeah. So I'm very excited about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, hopefully we'll be able to have you back on to talk about that film as and when it comes out.
Well, you definitely can. We'll see if it's as popular or as well received as this one. Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be next Thanksgiving or Christmas. I'll be glad to schedule it with you.
Yeah, let's get it locked in.
We could even, if it doesn't work, we could even talk about why it didn't work. That's fine.
Yeah,
That's fine.
something tells me that that team, you guys reuniting, I think you stand a pretty good chance.
We think so. We'll see. We'll see. We'll see. There's no guarantee, as you know.
Well, Eric, thank you so much for doing this today.
Thank you. I really always enjoy your questions. Are well thought out, and thank you. I hope I've made people interested more in Killers of the Flower Moon, and let's see what happens with it.
You've been listening to Script Apart. Thank you so much for tuning in. A reminder that if you want to help the show continue to grow, you can join us on Patreon by visiting patreon.com/scriptapart or clicking the link in today's show notes. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time.